Years ago, I watched my mother lose her job after developing carpal tunnel from years of repetitive data entry work. She had surgery, took time off, and was later let go. And that moment really stayed with me. It made me question not just technology, but leadership, and what happens when organizations adopt new tools without preparing the humans behind them. That's the experience that eventually led me to build Connex, a platform designed to automate e-commerce and accounting, remove friction from operations. But over time, I've realized something important. Technology alone doesn't transform a business. People do. That's why I'm excited to introduce today's guests. Felicia Newhouse is a researcher, advisor, and founder of AI-Powered Women, a platform dedicated to helping women business leaders and organizations navigate AI adoption with confidence, clarity, and human-centered energy. Felicia's work sits atop the intersection of AI adoption, workforce transformation, and modern leadership, and it challenges a hard truth many organizations overlook. Most AI initiatives don't fail because the technology doesn't work. AI initiatives fail because the humans aren't ready. Did you know that Gartner reports up to 85% of AI initiatives never reach production, largely due to culture, skill gaps, and leadership readiness? One of Felicia's most powerful insights is this: every $1 invested in AI deployment, organizations need roughly $3 invested in people transformation. Most companies invert that ratio and then wonder why the tools don't stick. Today's conversation is about what it actually takes to make AI work in sales organizations, not just technically, but culturally, emotionally, and strategically, especially as you look ahead to 2026. Felicia, can you start by sharing why did you find AI Powered for Women?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to be here. Yeah. Why did I find AI powered women? The reason why I found this company was really started from my days of being in product. So I was a VP of product for a really long time, in and out of startups that got acquired, startups that merged with larger companies. And essentially when I was there, I saw AI kind of kick off in 2023 with the LLMs, right? ChatGPT launching and all of that. I saw that we were really leaving women out of the conversation, and not that it was a gender thing necessarily. It was that so much of what needs to show up alongside AI is full human embodiment of leadership that is really human centric. And I saw that a lot of the ways we're building these AI models was not taking the whole human into account. Diverse voices, diverse ways of thinking, diverse ways of knowing, lived experiences, various types of expertise, different domains. It just seemed to be kind of happening a bit in a myopic vacuum. So when I saw that happening, I decided to start AI Powered Women, left that role, and we kicked off our first conference at MIT, which was actually a year ago this month. It feels like it's been 5 years, but it was just a year ago. And the conference really was focused on upskilling and talking about what was innovative and new. But what really surprised us was that a lot of what people are grappling with is the human transformation that's happening alongside the digital transformation. And so what started to really take shape is, yes, a lot of the dollars right now are going into digital transformation. Like companies are scrambling, their competitors are getting ahead of them, and they're saying, I need to invest in AI right now. We're already behind. So there's a lot of fear around that. But what I see being an even deeper issue is the sustainability of how companies are pivoting into AI without considering the impact of the human transformation that's happening alongside it. And I'm not just talking about like inside, just a company and their teams. I'm talking about like broader cultural transformation, leadership paradigms breaking down, the old type of leadership breaking down, having to evolve into new leadership paradigms, our entire workforce shifting, types of skills that are needed. And this is across the entire, what they call a barbell economy, like people that are coming out of school and also later career people. The types of skills that are needed are completely different now, and they're going to be shifting so rapidly. So that's really a lot of what we started to dig up from a research perspective, getting different voices on stage, collaborating with all different types of teams and companies and executives. And so we really have had that, wide eagle lens, that wide view on the whole market and what's happening. And there's just a lot of not really thinking through the human transformation first before we run into the AI deployments.
Yeah, I agree. I've heard similar statistics that many of these AI projects fail because the people don't know how to use them, or they're not quite implemented properly.
Yeah.
And that Gartner statistic is striking. 85% of AI initiatives fail to reach production. What are the most common human blockers that you see when companies try to roll out AI, Felicia?
Yeah, so I mean, three I would say show up pretty consistently. I mean, first is, I guess, fear masquerading as skepticism. So people will say, oh, this isn't going to work when they really mean, I don't feel safe. And this is, again, something that not a lot of companies are considering deeply yet, which is there's a huge degree of psychological unsafety inside a lot of organizations right now. I mean, there's a large degree of a feeling of unsafety across the world right now. There's a lot of change, right? We're not only living through times that are uncertain, we're also living through career trajectories that are uncertain. We don't know what our career looks like in, 6 months, never mind 10 years. I mean, I have parents come to me all the time that are like, I don't know how to advise my high school student who's about to go into college because I don't know what their career is going to look like. I would say first is kind of that fear piece and not considering what's behind that fear and how to support people that are fearful in a environment and how to really evolve the culture around that. And second is skills shame. A lot of leaders assume everyone will just figure it out, and many won't ask questions because they don't want to look behind, right? They don't want to look stupid. They don't want to look like they're the person in the room that just, isn't ahead of all this stuff. And I think biggest is people are afraid of becoming obsolete and being replaced. And third, I would say is leadership avoidance. A lot of executives delegate AI adoption downward without doing the internal work themselves. And teams notice immediately. And so I guess at the end of the day, AI amplifies whatever culture already exists, right? Like whatever issues or problematic areas you're already grappling with, AI is just going to, put those on steroids. So if your culture is avoiding discomfort and accountability or learning in public, AI will stall. And so it's just like any AI is a tool, right? And so it's what we do with that tool. And if we're not thinking about the humans that are using that tool and we're not considering the fear and the comfort and I would say even the anger towards it, because these are all real things that are coming out in surveys and research right now. We're even seeing that there's a fair amount of people actually intentionally making sure an AI deployment doesn't work. So they're sabotaging it because they're afraid that it will affect their job or their team's roles in that deployment somehow on the other side. So these are all very real, not very pretty things that are happening inside organizations that aren't being talked enough about. So that's what we've been trying to do is uncover that research and look at those bigger trends and look at specifically how HR teams and L&D teams can kind of work hand in hand with those digital transformation teams. This has to be an effort where you combine those orgs together. You can't have a successful AI deployment anymore without a really well-versed HR team to partner with. And that's the reality that the smarter companies are understanding and are really integrating those functions.
Yeah, it sounds like you definitely need an AI professional to build a lot of these AI tools, and more importantly, will people adopt them?
Yeah.
So you shared that for every $1 invested in AI tools, companies need about $3 invested in people transformation. A couple of things. What do you mean by people transformation? And why do organizations consistently get this ratio wrong?
Yeah, totally. It's a really good question. I was just at a conference like a month and a half ago where there were two different speakers at two different points in the day that said this statistic about the $1, into AI versus $3. I don't see it concretely happening in the market yet where yes, people are getting on stage and saying these numbers, but I haven't seen a lot of companies actually living up to those words of actually putting the $3 in, which is 3 times what they put into the AI. I don't see that happening at a wide scale yet. So that shows that there's a big gap here. Not only in the understanding, but in the really putting together frameworks, methodologies, things that actually are going to stick that help the people deploy it. But in terms of people transformation, what people transformation means, I think, is first off, it's cultural transformation. So it's like what I was saying before, it's really making sure you have a culture in which there is the ability to bring that AI deployment in and have it stick and be sustainable. And the stickiness part is the humans that are accepting it and not only accepting it, but they're going to nurture it and care for it and grow it. And so you need to have that buy-in. And so that buy-in is really what's missing with the people transformation. I think one of the reasons why it's not 3 times what they're investing into AI is because people transformation, quite frankly, doesn't feel as concrete as software. So it's not as, I mean, I would argue this, but this is what I've heard a lot of leaders say, is they don't feel like it's as measurable. They don't feel like they can measure it as easy as just, deploying an AI, whether it's a piece of software or a tool or an AI focused strategy, it's not as concrete. You can buy a tool and you can point to it. You can't like shortcut trust, right? Or learning or behavior change. Those are much messier. They're much grayer areas. They're much harder to really just put in a box and ship out and get to their side of. It's hard work and it takes longer. So most companies, I think, still operate with an industrial mindset. They install the system, they train once, they measure the output. And that worked when tools were static, but AI is different. It's not static. It evolves weekly, even daily, even hourly, like with how quickly we're seeing the pace of change just compound with AI. So that really requires leaders who can learn continuously, who have emotional intelligence, who have genuine compassion for the employees, that are listening and are able to really sit with the vulnerability of not knowing what the next step is and being with that, because we're in such a rapid container of change right now, more unprecedented than in any other time in history, you could argue, with just the pace of change. And it requires leaders who can regulate uncertainty and can guide others through ambiguity. And those are honestly rare traits. You don't see that in every leader. So when we talk about kind of the new leadership paradigm, I mean, these are things that we need to start training people for. We need to, think about this at the university level with kids that are, in college too, just how these traits can be cultivated. And organizations invert the ratio because they underestimate the cost of human adaptation and they overestimate compliance most times.
And speaking of compliance and ratios, let's talk about sales leadership. How does the role evolve in AI-augmented world, especially the shift from performance manager to sense maker, coach, and strategic translator?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, when you think about the future and where we're evolving to, I think the sales leader of the future is really less a performance enforcer and more of a sense maker. So AI will really kind of it'll handle the forecasting and the pattern detection and the administrative tasks, but what it can't do is help a rep make meaning of what's changing and manage self-doubt and recalibrate strategy in really uncertain terrain. So I think the sales leader of the future really becomes a translator between data and judgment and insight and action and pressure and possibility. So if leaders don't evolve emotionally and cognitively, they become a bottleneck. So I think that's really when we talk about sales leadership and how that role evolves in an AI augmented role, I think there is a much greater degree of emotional intelligence required. And we're not just looking at those straightforward kind of technical systems-based skills anymore. We're looking at a fair amount of emotional intelligence that's required.
And speaking of this emotional intelligence, that segues and my next question, great. Emotional intelligence is often labeled a soft skill, yet high EQ sales reps can outperform others by as much as 50%. How does AI amplify that advantage rather than replace it?
Yeah. So, AI really raises the floor, I think, but humans still define the ceiling, I guess is a good way to put it. When AI handles the mechanics, like what differentiates, top performers is presence and listening and intuition and trust building, right? And high emotional intelligence reps use AI to prepare better questions, right, before they get on the phone with a client. And they notice subtler patterns and they stay regulated under pressure. I think what we see is low emotional intelligence reps use AI to avoid thinking. So it's interesting because it's kind of like the difference between turning somebody more human or more robot. And so that's like a really interesting dichotomy when you think about what AI can ramp up or ramp down, levers we can play with when we're using AI. When we talk about human in the loop, at what point are we, using AI to make us more effective humans? In other words, we're stepping more vulnerably into the aspects of being human that are unique in the face of AI, or in what ways are we actually avoiding having to step into that discomfort of being more human and outsourcing AI. And that to me, whether we're talking about sales or we're talking about any other role or even industry or any other use case of AI, gets really interesting, just in terms of how leaders are using AI, and if they're using it to avoid thinking, how that becomes problematic for the sales function. So AI doesn't replace emotional intelligence. In fact, it can't. It makes the absence of it painfully obvious on teams.
Yeah, I agree. AI is not going to replace emotional intelligence. I find that with work, if work requires a judgment and a real human connection, it's work that a machine can't do. It's work that requires you. Many sales reps are feeling threatened by automation. And how can leaders rebuild this confidence in the fear that AI may replace the salespeople?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was going back to before, is we've seen this actively, and it's captured in some of the research too, is when a lot of employees, sales reps included, feel threatened by automation. I mean, they can even start sabotaging some of these deployments, so it can get interesting. So how can leaders rebuild confidence momentum? I'd say you don't start by convincing people AI is safe and just kind of top down it. You start by being honest about what's changing. This goes back to kind of the vulnerability of leadership that's required. I think one of the things we're seeing in the research too, and what we're hearing from a lot of employees, is this is an interesting time where people aren't necessarily looking to leaders to have it all together and to have all the answers. People are respecting leaders that have questions too, and they're open and they're curious and they're vulnerable and they don't know what's going to happen next. And I think that type of uncertainty with the change is really important to employees right now too. So I think leaders rebuild confidence by, again, being vulnerable and naming the fear instead of dismissing it. So, because otherwise, what we're seeing in a lot of companies is they just pretend they have it all together. They just pretend everything's great, that the leaders know everything, that, it's rah, 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 cheerleading everything. If there's, burnout in the company, let's just hire someone for 30 minutes to do some deep breathing at lunch break, and they kind of just check boxes. So I think employees want to see that there's a real deep listening and a real deep involvement of their employees. So when it comes to sales reps, it's really involving the reps in the experimentation, like deeply. So before the deployment, before the AI is even rolled out, you experiment, you have some pilot tests, and you really deeply involve the reps, especially if this is a sales focused deployment. This should really involve them from a strategic standpoint, listening, being curious, being comfortable with people's discomfort, I think, is a big piece, and rewarding learning and not just outcomes, and showing how AI really extends capability instead of just replacing identity. And I think the confidence comes with agency. If people feel AI is happening to them, the momentum's going to die because they don't feel part of it. But if they feel like they're actually shaping how it's used, and they feel genuinely engaged in that early experimentation, they're going to feel a sense of accountability and ownership. And I think that's where the momentum can return, and they can feel like this is an actual collaboration where their fear and their discomfort, which by the way is the same thing that will sabotage these deployments later on. Even if the deployment is initially successful, what we're seeing is the lasting sustainability of those deployments is not as successful. So those are like the little seeds of poison that can, if you're not catching it early enough and really bringing people into those collaborations, is so critical at this time with AI.
And speaking of those collaborations, you mentioned that psychological safety is really important for AI adoption. What does that look like in a real-world sales organization?
Yeah, I think it looks like leaders asking questions they don't already know the answers to. It looks like reps admitting confusion without any penalty. Having that safe environment like we were talking about before, where people feel like they can express their discomfort and they can express their fear without feeling like they're going to be penalized for it. And then there's the experimentation piece without public shaming. I think also the performance conversations that include emotional load and not just numbers. I think this is back to the cultural and human transformation that we absolutely need to see. That we talked about the $1 into AI and the $3 into people and culture. This is where that $3 in people and culture, that 3x, has to show up. It has to show up in the emotional load piece, that emotional listening, not just numbers. Because The old way of doing all this is just, well, we measure the numbers. We measure the numbers. What's the outcome? What's the revenue potential? And that just doesn't work here. People are messy. People have emotion. So the psychological safety isn't just softness. They adapt quicker and they recover better.
And speaking of, recovering better and wanting to be safe to express things in the workplace, you mentioned a great deal about change management, but it's often superficial. What does real change management for AI look like behaviorally, culturally, and cognitively?
Yeah, I think, real change management is behavioral. It's not just kind of ceremonial. It means it's redesigning the workflows and not just the tools. It means shifting incentives and not just the messaging. Training leaders is a big one before training the team. So making sure the leaders have the capacity to really hold those safe spaces for everyone and be that kind of beacon of light, that kind of lighthouse in a storm, so to speak, and supporting nervous systems and not just skill sets. And this is a big piece that the smartest companies are realizing, and this is why bringing the HR function into these technical AI deployments and digital transformations is so important. It's not woo-woo anymore to talk about nervous systems or to talk about mindfulness or talk about, deep breathing at work. These are neuroscience backed. The biggest universities and research institutes are looking at bringing this into real leadership now and showing that, it's really important that we look at the nervous system and we look at things like burnout, because these are the things that will sabotage any of these technical deployments, especially with the rate of change that humans are living through. And there's a lot of research that shows too our simple human kind of monkey brains are not designed for this pace of change. When we start stacking up a tech stack and we stack up AI deployments, we forget that while that is relieving the burden in some ways, the systems that we've created, the capitalistic systems we've created, actually just keep speeding things up. So the more we offload to the tools, the more leaders are like, cool, we got that done. All right, now let's stack on more. We can be even more productive, rather than slowing down and taking the temperature of the humans in the room. And that's the difference between the companies that are going to make it on the other side and be sustainable through this AI transition we're moving through, and the ones that won't, because those ones are going to burn out their teams completely. And we're not at a point yet where we can just have all agents running a company or all robots. We do still need humans. So I think if people's daily behaviors don't change, adoption didn't happen. And no matter how many licenses you bought, it will be an issue if we don't, think about that people transformation.
And speaking of 2026, and as companies preparing for this year and that total people transformation, what's the single most important shift leaders need to make today so AI becomes a competitive advantage instead of a stalled experiment?
Yeah. At AI-Powered Women, when we have our conferences and we bring all these various minds together, from philosophers to psychologists to poets to artists to technologists, the people building the technology, the conversation keeps coming back to leadership needs to look at AI as a mirror. We need to stop treating AI as a productivity upgrade and start treating it as a mirror that is showing us the shortcomings of our systems that are breaking down, and our leadership frameworks and how we approach leadership, how we approach teams. It really comes back to systems. A company is a system of people and processes and tools. And how do we reshape those systems so that they can be more conducive to supporting the humans and thereby the companies sustainably, and what we're building, innovation sustainably. So I think AI is going to expose how a lot of organizations handle fear and power and learning and trust. And leaders who develop emotional intelligence, emotional range, self-awareness, and systems thinking are the ones who are going to really thrive. And those who don't will keep buying tools and wondering why nothing sticks. And that's what we've been seeing come out in the numbers this year, over 2025.
This is wonderful. I'm glad you were able to tell us more about AI and how companies are trying to adopt it and some of the roadblocks, such as not investing enough money in people transformation. I want to thank you for joining us today and reframing this AI conversation in such an important way. If there's one takeaway, it's this: AI doesn't replace leadership, it demands leadership. If you want to learn more about Felicia's work or explore how she's helping leaders and organizations adopt AI adoption, visit AI-poweredwomen.com. And if you're looking to automate e-commerce accounting and operations while keeping your team focused on higher value work, visit connexecommerce.com. Be sure to subscribe and share this episode with a leader who's investing in AI and realizing that technology alone is not enough.